Eleanor Voss strutted into my crumbling shop in $1,000 heels wearing the smug smirk of someone who had already won. I stood under flickering yellow lights, breathing in grease and wiping my hands on a filthy rag that had seen much better decades. She judged my peeling paint and the rusted tin roof. Staring at my broken toolbox latch, she just laughed. "How much is this pile of junk worth, Mr. Calloway?" she sneered, treating my absolute ruin like a joke. But she had no idea about the project I was hiding behind the heavy steel door in the back. Stay with me, because the machine I kept locked behind that door was going to wreck everything she thought she owned. My old neighborhood, Maplewood, had been slowly dying for 2 years, rotting away one single property at a time, until the block looked less like a home and more like a smashed mouth missing half its teeth. Ugly orange construction fences slowly swallowed up 3 sides of my block. Beyond that cheap plastic barrier, the historic homes and local shops were completely gone. Just bulldozed ruins and empty dirt marked by wooden stakes. Where quiet backyards used to be, developers poured a massive cold slab of gray concrete. You know how it hurts. Our local dry cleaner of 40 years was reduced to a patch of gravel. And sitting right in the middle of that depressing emptiness, right where it always stood, was my rundown garage. I opened that rusty garage door at 6:45 every morning, just like I had for 11 long years. I was 41, weary and heavy-shouldered. My calloused, worn hands told my sad story better than any resume ever could. Scarred knuckles and rough palms ground down by endless hours turning heavy wrenches. A permanent line of engine grease stained my right thumbnail, defying every harsh chemical I tried. My hair had faded to a dusty gray much faster than it ever should have. And honestly, my tired face had learned to keep its secrets hidden. I chose this dying neighborhood 12 years ago for the same reason as everyone else. A simple working-class pocket that asked no questions and had no fake attitudes. Just a quiet place where a broke mechanic could work in peace and be left to focus on the heavy repairs I did best. I never wanted fame. I only wanted this small shop respected for doing honest work. 3 former workers called when they heard about the ruthless corporate developers coming to crush me. They actually begged to return and help me fight the eviction. I appreciated their loyalty, but I told them all no. I couldn't drag good people down into the hopeless fight I was facing. Standing on the street, my building looked like the pathetic heap of junk she claimed it was. The faded gray blocks were crumbling and peeling along the back wall. A deep, ugly line of rust split the tin roof above my service bay, and the cheap sign out front lost its letters years ago, but I never had the heart to fix it. Inside were just 2 dirty bays, a leaking lift, my basic tools, and just enough scrap to get by. I did every hard job completely alone. Basic fluid changes, diagnosing broken old sedans that the fancy corporate dealerships wouldn't waste their precious time trying to fix. I used to have regulars. They'd drive 20 minutes to this rusted-out place because of me, the only honest mechanic who actually fixed their broken engines on the very first try. But at the back of my rotting garage, blocked off from the bays by cheap drywall and a double-bolted steel door, I kept a secret room hidden. No one in this dying town had ever stepped foot inside. When people asked, I lied and said it was just for storage. That lie always seemed to work. One morning I found a flyer taped to my rusted, peeling roll-up door. A corporate notice from Voss Capital about some town hall meeting next Friday at our rundown civic center. The title read, "Neighborhood Development Information Session." I read their threat once, then folded it right back, and shoved the paper deep into my oil-stained back pocket. By 7:15 I was sliding under an old Jeep Cherokee. The greedy corporate sharks called at 9:30. Isaac Drummond, the developer's high-priced corporate lawyer. He had that smooth, slimy voice of a lawyer who had crushed struggling shops 1,000 times before. He claimed he understood my situation. He knew I got the warnings, lying that they wanted a friendly talk. Then he tried to set up a private meeting before Friday's town hall to discuss what he called alignment opportunities. I cut him off. "You buying my garage?" Isaac said yes. I told him I would see him Friday and hung up. I slammed the phone onto my rusty toolbox and crawled back under the wreck. Late that evening, when the last customer left and the dark shop went quiet, I just stood there staring at that heavy steel door. I didn't even open it. Just rested my calloused, weary hand against the cold deadbolt. You and I both know the heavy burden of carrying a massive secret for years. Finally, I killed the flickering lights, walked out the back, and locked up my failing shop. The loud construction crews went home by 5, leaving me alone in the dark. Almost felt like the rugged hometown I grew up in, if you ignored the empty, muddy gaps where my neighbors' homes used to be. Meanwhile, high up in their glossy 41st floor skyscraper office, my entire block was just a digital model, spinning on a massive screen right above their fancy mahogany conference table. 34 local properties had already been bought and signed away. On their screen, 34 sold lots glowed bright green. But one tiny stubborn spot in the middle, my rundown garage, glowed angry red. Isaac stood there with a yellow pad, whining to his boss that their mail, those threatening lawyer letters, and a smug visit from some rookie suit had been thrown straight in the trash. Eleanor Voss listened, her face remaining completely stone cold. She tapped her expensive manicured nails against the table once. Then she told him she would crush me herself. On Tuesday, the billionaire CEO rolled up to my rotting garage in a black Escalade. Picture it. She stepped onto my cracked, decaying pavement in a fancy suit. Gold glasses on, eyes glued to a phone she couldn't bother putting away. From the curb, she sized up my miserable, run-down garage. She looked at my dying business like a wrecking ball's next target. She just barged inside my crumbling shop. Her massive bodyguard followed right behind. I was in the back. I heard her expensive car arrive and watched as she strutted inside. I just wiped grease on a dirty rag and didn't bother greeting her. She introduced herself. I just nodded. Said her firm would pay $480,000 for my scrap pile, bragging that it was 18% over what this dump was worth. I let her finish, then looked up from my ruins, not for sale. I said it like a loser stubbornly guarding his last pile of dirt. No pride, no fight left, just stating the bleak facts. She just smirked. You and I both know her type. She took my helpless defiance and used it as leverage. She marched deeper into my decaying shop without an invite, scanning the stained walls, failing lifts, and the rusted wrecks inside. She wore that fake corporate mask, looking down on a poor man's ruins like a vulture, pretending she understood a broke mechanic's attachment to this dump. But the real giants had already devoured the rest of my street. The plans were set, and corporate money was ready to bury me. She warned me that a struggling father playing hero against billions was a losing game. I shrugged off her threat and offered to show her my current build. I pointed to a dusty, broken Jeep, ignoring her $1 million execution order. But when she finally turned toward the back of my decaying garage, her smug expression finally faded. She spotted the heavy steel door, locked down tight with 2 massive deadbolts instead of 1. She walked right up and grabbed the cold metal handle. Locked, she glared directly at me. "What are you hiding?" I stared at my dusty workbench. "Just old junk," I muttered. She rattled the lock again, hoping it would give, then backed away. Her giant bodyguard stared me down, trying to find my breaking point. I showed him no fear. Before leaving, she tossed her expensive card onto my greasy, rusted toolbox. Said she was offering $550,000 now, her final attempt to buy my ruin, warning me to think hard before throwing my life away. I picked up that thick, fancy card and stared at it. Then I dropped it right back into the black oil slick on my floor. The wealthy executive was already at the exit. She didn't even look back. Inside her luxury vehicle, she ordered her guard to dig up my tax history. Code violations, unpaid debts, old licenses, anything the city could use to crush me. She gave the order with icy calm, like a predator doing what they do best, burying a loser in his own ruins. That billionaire kept typing on his phone. Their fancy car rolled past the cleared land near my shop, Eleanor watching the empty dirt from behind clean glass. She stared at the empty ground, wanting to crush my shop, the last stubborn scar ruining her perfect corporate map. Late that night, after the workers left, I unlocked my heavy, rusted steel door. I stood alone in the cold darkness for a moment, then flipped the switch. My cheap shop lights flickered on, giving off just enough light for the desperate custom work I had left. I walked around the damp edges of my crumbling garage without stopping once. Then I turned back, cut the power, and locked both heavy deadbolts on my ruin. I drove home in the rusty 11-year-old truck I kept after my wife died. 2 days after her cruel visit, 2 city inspectors showed up at my rundown shop right at 8 a.m. I had just finished a cheap oil change, mopping the dirty floor when they banged on the dented metal door and flashed their fancy city badges. They spent 40 minutes probing my ancient fuse box and testing the damp walls, measuring the space under my broken shelves, tapping on the cracked concrete. Before leaving, they handed me a paper listing 5 sudden building violations: an ancient electrical panel and roof insulation that failed modern codes, a small crack in my concrete floor they claimed was too wide, bad airflow in my dusty back room, and a slight drainage problem inside Bay 2. I read over their long list of my failures. I signed the paper, thanked them for their time, and watched them leave. The official threat arrived by mail the next day, stamped with their expensive corporate logo and signed with Isaac's arrogant hand. The letter used those petty violations against me, citing local city laws. If I failed to fix everything, within 30 days, they would shut down my crumbling business for good. The bottom of the page warned that once I was shut down, their corrupt Economic Development Planning Board could legally use eminent domain to seize rundown properties inside their new redevelopment zones. I read those cruel words twice. I slowly folded the paper and tossed it in a drawer with the other bad news. Then I made a quick call that had absolutely nothing to do with those corrupt inspectors or lawyers. I dialed a number I still remembered by heart, and when he finally answered, I skipped the polite small talk. Jason, still hunting that 427. The phone went completely quiet, not from confusion, but because a rich man was realizing he finally got what he wanted. Sitting in his luxurious Pasadena office, Jason finally spoke in a quiet, serious voice. "I found it," I told him. "Be here in Maplewood Friday morning at 10 a.m. I gave him the address of my ruined shop and hung up before he could ask anything else. On Thursday, a reporter named Cameron Holt showed up with a cheap notepad and recorder. He was 35, a desperate writer chasing a story for the local paper. He'd spent 4 months investigating the corporate greed that was turning my life to dust. He unmasked the corporate machine, already swallowing 6 of our neighborhoods whole. He'd already interviewed 12 displaced Maplewood neighbors and 3 city council reps, plus a few other victims Eleanor had already cleared out across town. The reporter laid out the wreckage, asking if I'd speak on the record about Voss Capital. I told him I respected his drive, but I was keeping quiet about Voss Capital, for now anyway. Cameron pushed, asking if my silence meant I had fully given up. "Come by Friday morning at 10 if you want to see the real story. I'll have one then." I rolled his clean business card between my grease-stained fingers after he left. I tossed it onto my rusted tool chest, far from where that smug billionaire's card once sat. I felt the heavy truth of it. Thursday night, Grace Whitfield stopped by my crumbling shop. 67 years old, she had run her laundromat 3 doors down for her entire adult life. She was the only other local owner who actually tried to fight the inevitable. Shivering in my garage doorway, she refused to come inside and confess that she had finally surrendered. Her voice didn't even tremble. She whispered that the corporate vultures paid a fair price. She was packing for Raleigh, admitting defeat and accepting that it was finally time to move on. I told her she made the right choice. I truly meant it. She looked at me like a ghost, whispered a quiet goodnight, and slowly faded down the dark sidewalk. I stood there watching her shadow fade around the dark corner. I stayed alone in my crumbling garage until almost midnight. I slid the heavy steel door open, leaving it slightly cracked. To anyone passing, all they could see was my faint light, a dim amber rectangle fighting against the pitch-black back wall, my exhausted shadow pacing across the oil-stained concrete floor twice. Then I cut the power, and our block went completely silent. Across town, Isaac called Eleanor at 11:15, confirming my shop's final countdown. 30 days left. Eleanor asked if I had caved yet. Asked if I had called the city attorneys. Her assistant said no. "He will break before Friday," she declared, sounding entirely certain. She thought her corporate bullying taught her exactly when a working man's resistance breaks. That sad moment when desperate people stop fighting and beg for scraps. She assumed I had already crossed her invisible line of defeat. She was calculating our doom with blind eyes. She had no idea our community hall seated about 120. By 7 o'clock that Friday evening, my neighbors had filled every last chair. The crowd was completely mixed. Old friends who got scared, surrendered, and sold out. The last few stubborn business owners left on our block. 3 slick city council members, 2 nervous aides and hungry reporters. Plus the Voss Capital sharks, easily spotted in their expensive $1,000 suits. Cameron sat in the third row, notebook open, his pen ready to record our final defeat. Up front, a massive projector screen flashed a shiny, spinning corporate graphic. A fancy 3-dimensional render of tower glass, built on our ruins. They envisioned fancy restaurants, underground parking, and a giant rooftop terrace. Every glowing, sleek detail built to price out people like me. Their glossy blueprints stamped one name over our old streets, Voss Maplewood Center. Eleanor Voss ran her slick pitch. Smooth as oil, she had rehearsed this corporate takeover perfectly. She had run this heartless routine in so many dying town halls before. She fired off all those giant numbers without even blinking. 200 million invested, 1,200 temporary construction jobs. 450 staff jobs once they opened. 4.5 million in yearly city taxes. She bragged about green building awards, public plazas, and a $500,000 public art fund. She thanked my desperate neighbors who gladly sold out to them. She called her massive development a rare, once-in-a-generation blessing for our town. When she finished, the submissive crowd actually clapped. People just asked simple, harmless questions from the floor. Standard stuff, traffic, construction timelines. Paltry payouts for renters they were kicking to the curb. She brushed them off, tossing hard math to Isaac. Then a neighbor near the back raised his hand and asked. He politely asked about the last piece of land they had not bought yet. My crumbling, grease-stained auto repair garage on the south end. The CEO turned with a fake smug smile. She claimed her billion-dollar company made every attempt to buy out the stubborn owner of that ruined property. And regrettably, some foolish mechanics just could not let go of their ruins to embrace her shiny future. She said it so sweetly, pausing long enough for the whole room to laugh at my failing blue-collar life. I was sitting right there in the back row, third folding chair from the wall, wearing a torn flannel and grease-stained jeans, empty-handed at their show. No legal notes, no fancy folders, nothing on my table. Once their smug chuckles died down, I stood up. Eleanor spotted me and gave a condescending nod. I have a few questions about your eminent domain process, I said. I kept my voice steady, not even needing a mic. Specifically about the legal classification. Threshold for commercial properties in your zone. Isaac's expensive pen froze. I fired off 3 sharp questions. First, the legal time frame for a forced business closure. Notice and threat under the exact code they mailed to my ruined shop. Second, I demanded the hard proof. Standard their board, required to approve this hostile takeover. Let me show you how they dismantled my dispute-free commercial property. My third question was simple. Was the city inspection report triggering my ruined shop's compliance notice independently verified or just rubber-stamped by their own review board? I kept my questions sharp, trying to save my dying business. I asked them with quiet, desperate patience, like a defeated man desperately trying to get the facts on the record. The CEO Eleanor brushed off the first 2 with smug confidence, but on the third her polished answer dragged on too long. Her lawyer Isaac stared at his pad and refused to look up. She quickly pivoted to her corporate script, ignoring me entirely. She pretended to understand my desperate struggle. For working-class folks to watch corporate developers bulldoze our entire lives, and that her giant firm was operating completely within the law. Then she looked right at me to deliver the killing blow. She sneered, "With all due respect, Mr. Calloway, you are running a rotting wreck worth under $500,000. What our firm brings to this community has undeniable value. Value that won't be delayed by one small garage that, frankly, looks more like a pile of ruins than a real business." Her lawyer stepped up to twist the knife. He clicked to a slide showing my shop's death warrant, blown up in red ink for the whole council to see. He walked through all 5 of those alleged violations with cold, heartless precision. He concluded that under strict city building codes, My old garage was technically unfit to stay open for business. He called it scrap metal value without a hint of pity. Just reading my ruin off a boring spreadsheet. Someone in the front row let out a soft sigh that sounded like agreement. I sat back down, staring at my defeat. I leaned back, holding a quiet hope nobody else could see. I just stared at that giant screen, wearing a look the reporter later called faintly amused as my world fell apart. The CEO watched me from the front of the room, thinking she had finally broken me. But she was dead wrong. Afterwards, Eleanor immediately started schmoozing the council members near the exit. The reporter, Cameron, found me in the dim hallway. He wanted to know what my questions truly meant. I looked at him and said, "Come to my garage tomorrow morning." 10 sharp, then I walked into the dark. Cameron stood in the hallway, holding his pen as I walked away. He watched me leave, wrote a single line in his notebook and circled it. Cameron Holt arrived just before 10. He parked his car outside, spotting my shiny silver SUV already idling by the curb. I sat in the driver's seat, totally silent, just staring at his pathetic, crumbling garage with a doubtful smirk. Cameron walked right past me. We nodded, but neither of us spoke. The mechanic opened his side door before Cameron even knocked. His front bays looked like total ruins, a greasy lift, old tool chests, and a rusted sedan fit for scrap. He poured 3 mugs of black coffee, bringing 2 to the door. Then he leaned outside to wave me in. I stepped out of my luxury SUV and entered his dump. Immaculate, tailored, completely out of place. I gave the place a critical look, judging his oily mechanical parts like a pile of scrap. I introduced myself as the CEO. We shook hands, firm, direct, without any fake talk. I knew his name, but looking at this absolute wreck, I seriously doubted he was still at the top of his game. No friendly warmth here, just cold business and low expectations. He drained his coffee, explaining absolutely nothing. He just muttered, "Come on." Then he led us to the back of the garage. Cameron followed, and I reluctantly trailed behind. We walked past his greasy benches and the old hydraulic lift, stopping dead in front of a heavy steel door. He pulled an old key from his dirty jeans, turning the deadbolt locks with a heavy, satisfying click. He shoved the heavy door open and reached inside. Suddenly the lights snapped on. No cheap flickering shop bulbs here. Instead, brilliant ice-cold LED panels illuminated a spotless custom ceiling. It was a shocking contrast to the dying ruins outside. Fully insulated, pristine, and perfectly maintained. The floor was spotless epoxy with a clean gray finish. Every wall was lined with premium perforated steel. A commercial dehumidifier hummed quietly in the corner. The air in this secret room felt crisp, dry, and cool, nothing like his grimy garage outside. Cameron took 1 step inside and froze. I stepped in and went completely rigid. 4 masterpiece cars. They were spaced perfectly, looking more like framed works of art than mere machines. No cheap tarps and not a single drop of leaked oil. Their flawless paint jobs caught the bright lights like polished glass. Shining with a museum-level perfection I never expected to find in this scrap pile. Sitting right at the front of this hidden showroom was the prize. A 1967 Shelby GT 500 in Brittany blue. Deep blue, twin white racing stripes running perfectly down the center. Polished chrome side pipes. And a massive engine that dominated the room, looking incredibly powerful even while silent. I walked straight toward it, completely humbled and absolutely speechless. I slowly crouched down beside the driver's door, just studying the serial plate right through the glass. I stood up, pacing around the front of his car. I squatted by the passenger side, staring at the door-jammed data tag like I'd seen a ghost. I stood back up and glared at him. 20 seconds of dead silence passed before I finally choked out, "This is the Gainesville car." He nodded. When my voice returned, it dropped down, quieter, suddenly stripped of all my arrogance. "It's been missing since 1971, I whispered. He smiled. "I know." Next up sat his 1969 Dodge Charger classic build, a Daytona pure unrestored perfection. One of maybe 70 left globally, keeping its legendary aerodynamic nose cone and massive rear wing completely intact. The deep red paint had slowly oxidized over the decades, becoming something way richer than the factory mix. His third car was a 1970 Plymouth Cuda 446 pack, Tour Red manual 4-speed. Its original window sticker sat perfectly tucked inside the glove box alongside a rare factory build sheet folded right beneath the driver's seat. Every ride held real paperwork, no fakes, no fresh copies, just original paper. Window stickers, broadcast sheets, authentic dealer invoices. Clean title chains tracing right back to year one. He guarded these records in archival quality. Thick folders locked inside a fireproof cabinet, bolted hard near his shop's dehumidifier. Let me tell you, his fourth car hid in the back, and it was a totally different beast. It sat lower, built wider, sculpted purely for performance instead of vintage design trends. He had crafted its body panels from top-tier materials completely unavailable to the general public the year it was born. You wouldn't find any exterior badging or corporate manufacturer logos. Zero flashy trim. If it didn't serve a structural purpose, it wasn't there. The raw proportions looked wrong in a way. That custom-built machines always shocked guys used to standard production cars. Too aggressive, way too stripped. Clearly built by a mechanic who only cared about absolute power once that engine finally fired up. Those cooling vents along the rear quarter panels, he had sized and placed every single one. The diffuser tucked under the tail section wasn't just decoration. He had burned countless midnight hours perfecting every single surface of this monster. And all that blue-collar sweat showed in every sharp line. Stamped quietly into the driver's side sill were tiny letters, Hargrove Apexer Pro 2. I read those letters, then slowly looked up at him. You worked for Hargrove Motorsport, I muttered. It wasn't really a question anymore. I watched him walk to his metal cabinet, grabbing an old manila folder. Inside sat his old engineering license and a weathered Hargrove Motorsport employee ID card. 4 photos showed him standing inside a high-tech facility, definitely not this dusty old garage. A massive, bright engineering floor. Monitors, heavy fabrication equipment, cars halfway through assembly, and a pristine set of technical blueprints. Each one signed right in the lower corner, Owen Calloway. Lead powertrain engineer, Hargrove Motorsport. 2003 to 2014. I could only stare at those drawings, completely humbled. He stared at that fourth dusty classic, then looked right at me. I told him my story straight, no pity, no lies, just the plain facts. For 11 years, I ran the main powertrain engineering team over at Hargrove. I was damn good at it, the kind of good you only get when you love the grease. I wasn't just pretending I lived it. Until the line between man and machine just slowly started to fade. My wife got sick back in 2013. I lost her the next spring. After she passed, I just couldn't go back. Not to that fancy corporate garage or the daily grind. I couldn't face the empty life we built together. I walked out carrying only what my contract legally guaranteed was mine. The Apex prototype was my personal project built off the clock to my own custom specs. And my employment contract was absolutely crystal clear. I kept complete ownership of any engineering work done off the clock. You know how broken guys slowly find their way back? Hunting those 3 classics was my path. Just one restoration at a time, no rushing, no deadlines, and no final destination. Just honest, quiet repair work. I spent 6 years chasing that Shelby before finally pulling it from a rural Georgia probate file. And the Daytona, I bought it with money I'd been scraping together since 26. Jason Merritt was already dialing his phone. Standing right by my Shelby, he talked for 3 solid minutes to someone at the Barrett-Jackson auction consignment office down in Scottsdale. He spoke quiet, with the confidence of a man who handles million-dollar car deals every day. Yet his free hand stayed rested lightly on the Shelby's roof the entire time. Like he was touching a ghost he still couldn't believe was real. When he finally hung up the phone, he turned to face me. The Shelby and the Apex alone, at a highly conservative estimate. At the absolute floor, you're looking at $4.5 million. With the historical importance of the Apex, the ceiling is wide open. There are 2 or 3 heavy collectors actively hunting for this. They've spent 10 years trying to find a genuine Hargrove prototype. The second this garage find hits the news, your phone won't stop ringing. He paused. All 4 cars together under the right auction hammer. You're easily looking at $6.5 to $8 million. Minimum. My dusty shop fell completely silent, just the hum of the dehumidifier. Cameron dropped his notebook onto my file cabinet, snatched it back and scribbled a line. I just stood there with my greasy hands hanging, totally speechless. So Eleanor Voss stood right up in front of her entire boardroom, Cameron said slowly, and called all of this worthless scrap metal. I stared right back at him. You can print exactly that, I replied. Before they left my dusty shop, I walked to the far wall, stopping under a framed photo near the door. A plain 4x6 in a cheap black frame. My beautiful wife in her 30s, sitting on the Shelby's hood, laughing at something off camera. In the photo, the car was running, though our restoration was far from finished. We still had strips of masking paper taped along the doors. He finally told his son his dead wife always looked peaceful in that dump. He didn't say another word, just shut off the shop lights and walked away. By Monday morning, that reporter Cameron dragged my name across the Maplewood Chronicle. Then the story exploded online in a way my publicists never saw coming. The headline screamed, "Inside the garage Eleanor Voss called scrap metal." Over 2,000 words of slander, paired with 3 detailed photos. They showed his weathered shop, highlighting his 4 rebuilds under LED lights. They even included a close-up of that rare Hargrove Apex R prototype plate. That trader Jason Merritt went on record, fabricating ridiculous auction valuation numbers. They even twisted my private remarks from our town meeting. That hack Cameron printed them word for word in the 4th paragraph. The internet moved ruthlessly. By 2 p.m., multiple car blogs and business journals reposted it. It even hit a major national finance outlet's daily briefing. The vintage car community is small, but they watch things like hawks. They had been dragging my company since 9 in the morning. The moment I arrived at my office at 8:30, my assistant Isaac had already logged 14 missed calls on our main line. 2 came straight from our firm's absolute biggest institutional investor. Another was a panicked partner over at our construction financing firm. 3 of them were bloodthirsty local reporters. One was a city council chief of staff, demanding I call her back. She wanted to question our perfectly legal timeline for acquiring that mechanic's garage. I stood frozen by my corner office window, feeling completely trapped. My coffee went totally cold as Isaac nervously read those messages in order. I quietly told him to call the institutional investor back first. But the next morning, Cameron leaked more. He sent files to the Oversight Committee, documents he obtained through a sneaky public records request he had filed 3 weeks earlier. He exposed the exact internal processing timestamps from that mechanic's inspection report. The city's inspection office received that report exactly 48 hours after he rejected my $550 offer. Normally, the Oversight Committee's standard processing queue for normal shop inspections usually took about 11 business days. Somehow his inspection had been bumped to priority status, thanks to a request from our Development Authority's liaison account. A rare loophole meant strictly for urgent health and safety. Emergencies, definitely not for basic code enforcement on a garage. Sure, Isaac's actual name didn't appear anywhere on the request, but that account traced straight back to the consulting firm Voss Capital hired for permits. By Wednesday morning, I had to call the mechanic myself. No assistant buffering the call. I just listened to the line and waited. I swallowed my pride and asked to discuss a revised arrangement. I had to offer him $1.2 million for his garage, double my previous bid. I claimed this finally reflected a more accurate assessment of his garage's strategic value to us. I finished talking, and he just looked at me and said he wasn't selling his shop. I just sat there in absolute dead silence. Then I asked him, shocked by my own bluntness, what he actually wanted from me. He fired back with 3 simple demands. First, those 3 eastern lots on the Maplewood block I bought but hadn't touched yet. Sell them back to the neighborhood community land. Trust at my exact original cost with 0 corporate markup. Second, drop the code violations and the eminent domain. Make it official through the city attorney's office. Third, a real public statement, not some canned press release. I had to publicly admit my massive real estate buyout hurt folks in Maplewood who deserved a hell of a lot better. He said absolutely nothing else. He just waited. The heavy silence hung there for 15 long seconds. I muttered that my team would review his terms and get back through proper channels. He told me that worked and hung up. I didn't just wave the white flag immediately. It took 3 tense days of backroom scrambling. 2 panic calls between my fancy lawyers and City Hall, plus 1 brutal chat between me and the head of the Voss Capital investment fund. A talk where that big money director made it crystal clear that the fund's strict rules for backing my massive new development project required this whole messy PR problem to vanish before they handed over another dime. My attack dog Isaac fought all 3 of his demands, but I shut him down every time. Voss Capital officially yanked that bogus city compliance notice on Thursday, claiming a sudden internal paperwork review had found mysterious errors in our city inspection process. That same afternoon, my suit-and-tie executives signed over those 3 eastern lots back to the Maplewood Land Trust for the exact original price, nearly $940,000 under current market value. I stood up at a quick press conference outside Civic Hall that Friday, reading from a prepared statement admitting my luxury development project had totally failed to respect the blue-collar history and the real people of Maplewood, and that my company promised to actually listen to their neighborhood moving forward. I took 2 quick questions, then bolted. I made sure my stone-cold face gave absolutely nothing away. Building on my massive Voss Commercial Center started next month, right on schedule. Those shiny high-rise towers went up out west exactly as planned. The fancy restaurant strip opened 14 months later, right down on the south end of their block, tucked right between my cold glass entrance and the absolute edge of those saved neighborhood lots. His eyesore of a garage sat right there, ruining my view. He brushed on that same old flat gray paint I lost, plain and simple. Look at this, I finally patched up my broken-down Calloway auto sign today. My family name barely holding together on that rusted scrap heap. I never cared to fix the dim, flickering shop lights. I left the leaking tin roof and the rotting wood exactly as they were. No point trying to compete with the $1-million condos next door. My place stayed a total eyesore. Wealthy folks kept walking right past my ruins, on their way to Maplewood, completely blind to what lay behind my rusted steel door. I liked being the neighborhood loser with a secret. That was the whole point. 6 weeks after the news broke, Jason Merritt showed up at my wreck. We sat together in the dusty front bay, the drafty roll-up door open, letting the cold autumn wind right in. That was when he pitched his fancy little business proposal. He had a slot locked in for the big Scottsdale auction this January. He wanted my rare Daytona to lead, solid paperwork, matching numbers, perfect history. Buyers were paying a massive premium for completely unrestored, dusty barn finds like mine. I could keep the Shelby, Apex, and Cuda for now, just sell one, test the market. I stared at those clean, white pages in my grease-stained hands for a minute, and then I agreed the Daytona was the play. We shook on it across my battered old tool chest. It was my first actual move since the year my wife passed, a big deal. I would never say it out loud, but the timing felt just right. That night, I sat alone in my secret back room with the dim lights cast low, the soft, dusty orange light I always liked after hours. The Shelby was right there, the Apex on my left. I just sat in the quiet. No work, no phone calls, just me in a broken chair surrounded by absolute gold, tracing the shadows across the dusty paint of my hidden treasures, remembering all the tough, broke years spent in these quiet ruins, while the high society crowd never knew my secret. Eleanor Voss stood right outside this dump and called it a junk pile. She laughed at my life's work in front of her rich investor friends. I sat in a creaky plastic chair taking it, but I wasn't even mad. It was a cold, quiet patience. The kind of patience you have when you know your day is coming. Sitting in my ruins, I knew the payoff was right around the corner. This scrap heap was actually a gold mine. She thought I was a loser living in ruins. She just couldn't see.